Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Sunday, March 1st, 2026. And I want you to take a second and just look at the world around you right now. Really look at it.
Yeah, it is quite the picture.
Right. If you've been checking your portfolio lately, or, reading the headlines, or even just noticing the price of gas at the pump versus the price of groceries, you know that things feel weird.
Weird is a very polite way of putting it.
I am trying to be optimistic here.
Yeah.
But honestly, it feels like the ground has just completely shifted beneath us.
It has.
We spent the last few years hearing all about multipolar worlds and these grand diplomatic summits, but suddenly, like in the last 60 days, the vibe has shifted from a debate club to a construction site.
Or an emergency room.
Yes, an emergency room. That is actually the perfect way to frame it.
You are sensing the change in the operating system. That is what that weird feeling is.
Operating system.
Exactly. We are no longer living in a world of diplomatic nuance or soft power. The days of strongly worded letters from the UN are over. We have shifted violently into an era of engineering challenges.
Which brings us to our topic today. The old rules were about negotiation, but the new rules, they are about hardware, latency, and uptime.
Precisely.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We aren't just reading the news for this deep dive. We're looking at a stack of documents that reads less like political science and much more like a technical manual for a piece of heavy machinery.
It is dense material.
Very dense. We are diving into the Realpolitik Bulldozer framework, specifically version 9.7.0.
Which is quite a mouthful to say.
It really is. But this framework is fascinating. It's this high-level intelligence system that views geopolitics through two very specific, very intense lenses, IT architecture and medical pathology.
The architect and the surgeon.
The architect and the surgeon, right. So here's the deal for everyone listening. We're going to ask you to do something a bit difficult today.
You need to stop thinking like a voter.
Yes. Stop thinking like a citizen with a passport. Stop thinking about what is fair or nice or right. For the next hour or so, you need to adopt two distinct roles. You need to think like a systems engineer looking for bugs in code.
And you need to think like a trauma surgeon looking for dead tissue.
Because if you don't make that mental switch,
you are going to misinterpret every single signal coming out of Washington, Beijing, and Brasilia right now.
Right. You'll see chaos where there is actually a very cold, very efficient logic at work. You'll see cruelty where the system sees optimization.
And our mission today is to make sure you understand that logic. Because if you don't understand the operating system, you will be crushed by it.
We want to safeguard your hardware. And by hardware, we mean your assets, your wealth, your ability to function in this new reality.
We need to protect you against what this framework literally calls a global blue screen of death.
A total system collapse.
Exactly. We are going to explain why the U.S. has moved away from negotiation and initiated what we call a forced restart. And to do that, we have to start with the source code, the operating system itself.
Okay, let's get into segment one, the operating system. We have the Donroe Doctrine and the Iron Trinity.
Right.
We keep throwing around this term Logistical OS. You touched on it, but walk me through the shift. How is this different from how we used to view sovereignty?
Think about the 20th century. Sovereignty was defined by Westphalian standards.
Meaning borders and governments.
Exactly. You have a border, you have a flag, you have a seat at the UN. Congratulations, you are a country. Even if your economy is a mess or your institutions are failing, you are still a sovereign country.
But not anymore.
No. In the Logistical OS of 2026, that definition is completely obsolete.
Obsolete how? Exactly.
Sovereignty is now defined by flow. Flow sovereignty.
Flow sovereignty?
Yes. Power belongs to whoever controls the packets.
Packets of data?
Data, yes, but also energy molecules, financial transactions, physical logistics, the tangible things that make the modern world run.
So having a border doesn't matter if you don't control what crosses it.
Right. If you have a flag, but you cannot control the data flowing through your 6G networks because the hardware was built by a foreign power, you are not sovereign, you are just a user.
Wow. A user. That is a crucial distinction. You're saying an entire country can be reduced to a user on someone else's network.
Precisely. And users can be banned. Users can be throttled. Users have no inherent rights, only privileges granted by the admin.
And the admin in this scenario
is the core, the United States and its highly integrated allies. The rule of 2026 is the efficiency mandate.
Right. The documents stress efficiency above almost everything else.
Because no government is allowed to be slower than an AI. If your regulatory body takes 3 years to approve a lithium mine, you are creating latency.
Latency is bad.
In the old world, latency was just red tape. People complained, but it was normal. In the Bulldozer OS, latency is an error in the code. It threatens the entire network.
So what happens to a government that creates too much latency?
It gets classified as malware.
Malware. That is incredibly harsh.
It is perfectly accurate within the framework. Bureaucracy is a virus, correction is packet loss, and you don't negotiate with malware.
You delete it.
You quarantine it, and then you format the drive.
Okay, this brings us perfectly to the Donroe Doctrine. We have seen this term plastered everywhere since January. Sounds like, a history nerd's pun on the Monroe Doctrine from 1823.
It is a play on that, yes, but it is deadly serious. The original Monroe Doctrine was mostly defensive. It was about telling European powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
The Donroe Doctrine, which really emerged fully after Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela on January 3rd, is an aggressive update. It is version 2.0.
We are definitely going to get into Venezuela and the case studies later because that operation was, well, wild is an understatement. But tell me more about the doctrine itself first.
The Donroe Doctrine strips away all the old moral rhetoric. For decades, the U.S. operated under the guise of spreading democracy or protecting human rights.
Which, are noble goals.
Noble, yes, but they often clouded the strategic objectives. They created friction in the policy. The Donroe Doctrine basically says, we don't care about the moral rhetoric anymore.
So what is it about?
Functional hemispheric dominance. The goal is simple. Total exclusion of non-hemispheric rivals.
Meaning China, Russia, Iran.
Exactly. They are to be entirely purged from the Western Hemisphere. That is step one. Step two is the formatting of failed regimes into audited nodes.
Audited nodes. I keep getting hung up on that specific language in the source material. It sounds so clinical, so detached from the human reality of a country.
It is designed to be detached. The U.S. is effectively saying, we don't care about your internal politics. We don't care who your president is or what your social policies are, but we absolutely care if your ports are running Chinese software. We care if your oil output is inefficient.
Right.
If you are a chaotic regime that lets China build a naval base disguised as a commercial container terminal, you are a security risk. You are a bug in the code. You need to be formatted.
So it isn't about ideology anymore at all. It is strictly about compatibility.
Are you compatible with the core operating system? If yes, you get rich, you get protection. If no, you get formatted.
And to enforce this, the sources describe something called the Iron Trinity. This is the actual hardware behind the doctrine. It's not just words, it's machinery.
Yes, 3 core pillars.
Let's break them down. First up, we have the Golden Dome.
This is the protection layer, the hemispheric firewall. But you shouldn't just think of a firewall on your laptop. Think of a physical and digital shield encompassing half the globe.
What is it made of?
It is a massive tech stack. It combines SpaceX and Starlink for total orbital dominance, combined with DOGE administrative audits and severe tariffs at the borders.
DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
Yes. It is bureaucratic streamlining weaponized for geopolitics. The Golden Dome functions to filter out the Yuan virus, which is their term for systemic Chinese influence, and ensures 99.9% uptime for members.
But there is an invulnerability aspect to this that the documents highlight, right?
Oh, that is the real game changer. Look at the Starshield component. If the U.S. can intercept 99% of incoming ballistic threats and completely dominate the orbital communications layer, it essentially removes the cost of retaliation.
Okay, unpack that for me. What does removing the cost of retaliation actually mean for global politics?
For 70 years, we lived under Amadi. Mutual assured destruction. If I hit you, you hit me, and we both die. That fear kept the peace.
Right.
But if I build an impenetrable shield, a Golden Dome, that means I can hit you, but you cannot hit me. Or at least your counterattack won't kill me. That fundamentally changes the math.
It allows the U.S. to operate with near impunity.
Exactly. It flips the equation from a balance of power to asymmetric dominance.
That sounds incredibly destabilizing for everyone outside the dome.
It is terrifying for them. That is why the world feels so tense right now. The other powers realize the window to act is closing permanently.
Which leads us directly to the second pillar, the bulldozer itself. Hence the title of this deep dive.
The bulldozer is the offensive arm of the OS. In the technical documents, they refer to it as the diplomacy of the earth mover.
That is a brutal image.
It is meant to be. A bulldozer doesn't argue with the dirt in front of it. It doesn't negotiate with the rocks. It just moves them.
So how does this play out diplomatically?
It represents a complete shift from negotiation to the clearing of toxic assets. The bulldozer offers states a strict binary choice. They call it the SLA binary, service level agreement.
Like an IT contract you sign with a cloud provider.
Exactly like that. The choice given to nations is simply this: sink and purge, or blue screen.
Sink and purge. It sounds like some kind of dystopian sci-fi cult initiation.
It essentially means this: connect to the Golden Dome. Open your internal books to the DOGE auditors. Purge any Chinese or Russian assets, infrastructure, or military advisors from your territory. Clean house entirely.
And if a country does that?
If you do that, you get synced. You get military protection, you get capital investment, you get frictionless access to the largest market in the world. You become a protected node.
And if you choose the other option, if you refuse...
Then you get the blue screen. Total disconnection.
We aren't just talking about traditional trade sanctions here, are we?
No. We are talking about being entirely locked out of the SWIFT system. We are talking about total data blackouts, tariffs that immediately strangle your exports, and potentially kinetic military action to remove specific threats. Your economy crashes instantly. Your national screen goes blue.
So the message is literally join the network or go offline forever.
Permanently.
Yeah.
There is no third option. There is no non-aligned movement in 2026. You cannot sit this one out.
Wow. Okay, and the third pillar of this Iron Trinity is energy asphyxiation. This actually explains something that has been confusing a lot of people. Despite all this global chaos, gas prices at the pump have been sitting at that weirdly stable, fairly low level.
Right. They call this pillar the pacifier. Oil is being artificially locked at roughly $50 to $60 a barrel.
Now, as a consumer, I love cheap gas.
Yeah.
But usually when the world is on fire and the Middle East is tense, oil shoots up to $100 or $120. Why is it forced down right now?
Because the core, the U.S., and its aligned energy partners is deliberately flooding the market. This is a highly strategic move. It is weaponized deflation.
Weaponized deflation. Who is the target?
The energy dictatorships, primarily Russia and Iran. Their entire national economies are built on the fundamental premise that oil needs to be at $80, $9, or $100 a barrel just to balance their state budgets and fund their militaries.
Right. They need that massive cash flow to pay the soldiers and build the drone swarms.
Exactly. So by forcing oil down to $50 and keeping it there, the U.S. is starving them of oxygen. That is the asphyxiation. It forces a brutal pivot toward cost efficiency that those regimes cannot handle.
Because their production costs are too high.
Yes. If you cannot pump oil profitably at $50, you eventually go bankrupt. Russia is pumping at a loss or at bare minimum margins right now. They are bleeding their sovereign reserves dry just to keep the wells open.
It is incredible to think of low prices as a geopolitical weapon. We usually think of sanctions as stopping trade, saying you cannot sell your oil. But this strategy is basically saying, go ahead and sell it, but we guarantee you won't make a dime.
It is the difference between a siege and a blockade. A blockade stops the goods from moving. A siege starves the occupants inside the castle. This is a siege.
And it has a dual purpose, right?
Yes, because while it starves the rivals, it fuels the core economies. The U.S., Europe, the synced nations, they all get cheap energy, which acts as a massive economic stimulus. It is a double-edged sword that deeply cuts the enemy while simultaneously healing the user.
Okay, that is the operating system. It is cold, it is mechanical, and it is terrifyingly efficient. But now I want to switch hats. We have been the architect looking at the wires and the code. Now let's put on the scrubs. Let's become the surgeon. Segment 2, clinical diagnosis.
Right. Now we transition to looking at the wetware. In this framework, the world isn't just a circuit board. It is a patient in the intensive care unit.
So we stop using political terms like insurrection or treaty violation.
And we start using strictly medical terminology.
Why the shift in language? Why does the framework need both of these lenses?
Because the architect explains how the system works logistically, but the surgeon explains why the system is dying organically. You need the medical lens to diagnose the failures of biological systems, and at the end of the day, human societies and governments are biological systems.
So let's look at the anatomy of this global patient. The sources identify specific geographical points as vital organs. Let's start with the aorta.
The Panama Canal.
The aorta, the main artery.
Exactly. It carries the blood, which is the massive trade volume, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It is the absolute lifeblood of the Western Hemisphere's economy.
And the surgeon's diagnosis for the Panama Canal?
Ischemia.
Which means what in this context?
Ischemia is the restriction of blood supply to tissues. In medical terms, severe ischemia inevitably leads to tissue death. The sources point out that the canal has been suffering from calcification, which refers to the physical droughts affecting water levels. But much more importantly, it is suffering from an infection by non-core assets.
You mean the Chinese port operators?
Correct. China has heavy strategic investments in the major ports on both ends of the canal. To the surgeon, this isn't just a business deal. This is a physical blockage. It is dangerous plaque building up in the main artery.
Because they could shut it down.
Right. If the U.S. wants the blood to flow freely during a major geopolitical conflict, it absolutely cannot have the critical valves controlled by a rival immune system. The clinical diagnosis is that if this infection isn't cleared out, the regional system suffers peripheral necrosis.
The limb dies.
Meaning South American trade collapses entirely.
So what is the surgical prescription?
Angioplasty, clearing the blockage by force. We are already seeing immense, unyielding pressure on Panama to completely revoke those Chinese port concessions.
Speaking of cardiovascular issues, the heart itself is identified in the framework as the Strait of Hormuz.
The pressure pump of global energy. Even with the U.S. achieving energy independence, Hormuz still fundamentally dictates the global price of oil.
And the current medical status of the heart.
Alarming. Arrhythmia.
An irregular heartbeat.
A very dangerous, highly volatile one. The stress index for Hormuz is currently sitting at 7.6 out of 10. That puts it squarely in the red zone.
And the ultimate risk there is cardiac arrest.
Total blockage. If Iran closes the strait, or if it gets heavily mined, the global energy system goes into immediate systemic shock. But remember the pacifier strategy we just talked about?
The U.S. flooding the market.
Right. Because of that, the U.S. is far less dependent on this heart than it used to be. The U.S. basically has a pacemaker installed its own massive domestic shale production.
Yeah.
But for Asia, for China,
It's fatal.
it is a massive system-ending heart attack. China imports a huge percentage of its raw energy through that specific strait. So the U.S. watching the arrhythmia in Hormuz is like a doctor watching a patient's heart struggle, but knowing full well that the patient dying isn't the U.S., it's China.
Wow. Let's talk about China then. The sources describe China not as a pure rival superpower, but as the skeleton of the global manufacturing body. But there's a specific diagnosis here that really surprised me when I was reading through the material.
Institutional osteoporosis.
Yes, institutional osteoporosis.
This is a fascinating, highly contrarian insight from the intelligence framework. Because to the naked eye, China looks incredibly hard. It looks like a very strong bone.
Right, you see the massive military buildup, the hypersonic missiles, millions of cheap drones, the massive naval shipyards. It looks like a femur that can take a serious hit.
But the surgeon doesn't look at the skin. The surgeon looks at the X-ray.
And the X-ray shows.
The X-ray shows that inside the bone is highly porous and brittle, institutional osteoporosis.
What exactly is causing this structural brittleness?
3 compounding factors. First, severe demographic collapse. Their workforce is shrinking faster than any population in recorded human history. You simply cannot maintain a massive manufacturing empire without young workers.
Right, the math just doesn't work.
Second, massive internal debt. Specifically, the hidden off-balance sheet debt in the local provinces. It's eating away at the fiscal marrow. And third, and the OS flags this as crucial, the ongoing purges of technical experts.
You're talking about incidents like the defense minister Li Shangfu disappearing.
Yes, exactly. Him and the entire leadership of the rocket force. When a system purges its competent technocrats and its experienced generals and replaces them solely with ideological loyalists, you lose systemic competence. You lose bone density.
So the structure can still hold up the everyday weight of the state.
For now, yes, but it loses all its flexibility. It looks incredibly tough on the outside, but if you hit it hard enough with an external shock,
It shatters.
it doesn't bend, it just snaps. And the really interesting thing is, Beijing's internal diagnostics know this. That is exactly why they are frantically building a bunker.
The sources draw a sharp distinction here. They contrast the U.S. Golden Dome with the Chinese approach.
Yes. The U.S. Golden Dome is orbital, it is digital, it is high-tech. The Chinese response is the bunker of gold. They are hoarding physical gold at an absolute record pace.
They are trying to create a physical hard asset fortress because they secretly know their digital and demographic bones are too weak to sustain a prolonged conflict.
Precisely. They are effectively trying to cast a heavy iron cast around a broken bone before the bone actually snaps.
And we have to talk about the pathogen itself. The framework calls it the Yuan virus. I feel a bit like the host of a medical drama right now, but this is exactly how the intel describes it.
It really is the most accurate systemic metaphor for how the Bulldozer OS treats Chinese global influence. It is no longer treated as foreign direct investment or developmental aid,
It's treated as an infection.
a highly contagious systemic infection.
How does this infection spread, according to the surgeon?
Primarily via debt traps and physical infrastructure. Think of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. A state-backed entity comes in, offers to build a massive deep-water port, and lends the host country the money to do it.
But the country can't pay it back.
The terms ensure they usually can't. So you default, and Beijing takes operational control of the port. That is an infection spreading into the host's tissue. But the virus is also digital. It's the 6G networks. It's the Huawei residue left in the telecom stacks.
The hardware itself is the carrier.
Yes. If your national 5G or 6G network is built on Chinese-manufactured routers and switches, the surgeon views that as severe nervous system damage.
Because the data isn't secure.
You suffer from high financial latency, immense data contamination, and a total loss of flow sovereignty. Your deepest national secrets and your economic data are constantly flowing back to servers in Beijing.
So what is the medical treatment prescribed by the surgeon for the Yuan virus?
Bulldozer quarantine, followed by asset resection.
Asset resection.
You cut it out, you use a scalpel, you don't politely ask the virus to leave the body, you surgically, aggressively remove the tissue that the virus inhabits.
Which transitions us perfectly into segment 3, surgical case studies. Because asset resection sounds highly abstract until you see it actually happen in real time. And we have 2 major operations to look at today. Case study A, Venezuela.
This is the Greenfield Reset. It was the ultimate proof of concept for the new Donroe Doctrine.
Take us back a bit to January 3rd, 2026. Operation Absolute Resolve. Because looking back at the media coverage from that week, it was just confused. Everyone was completely baffled.
It was confused because it didn't look anything like a traditional 20th century invasion. There were no massive columns of tanks rolling across the border. There was no weeks-long shock and awe bombing campaign leveling cities.
So what actually happened? Walk us through the operation via the framework.
The clinical diagnosis for Venezuela was a toxic asset or a failed partition on the regional hard drive. It wasn't just viewed as a bad dictatorship. It was a corrupted sector that was actively preventing the entire hemispheric region from functioning efficiently.
So the surgeon scrubbed in.
Precisely. The operation started with a total precision cyber blackout. This was the Logistical OS at work. All communications within the regime's upper echelons were instantly severed.
They were deaf and blind.
Exactly. Then came the physical resection. Precision decapitation. Elite special operators combined with autonomous drone swarms physically removed the core leadership. Maduro, Flores, the top loyalist generals in a matter of hours.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me. In the old days, think of Iraq or Afghanistan, we would have immediately started talking about nation building.
Right, hearts and minds.
Yeah, we would have sent in the Peace Corps, set up interim councils, and promised democratic elections 3 months later.
The bulldozer does not care about any of that. The post-op report treats Venezuela not as a broken society to be lovingly rebuilt, but strictly as an underperforming oil asset that needs to be reconditioned.
It sounds exactly like a private equity firm doing a hostile takeover of a failing company.
Because that is exactly what it is. It is a sovereign, hostile takeover. PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company, was essentially hard reset via immediate joint ventures with U.S. majors like Chevron.
So they just took over the pumps.
The U.S. military rapidly secured the physical fields, the engineering corps secured the pumping hardware, and the corporate lawyers secured the extraction contracts.
So the end goal isn't freedom in the abstract sense.
Yeah, no. The goal is integrating the Venezuelan nodes into the audited energy flow of the core. The only metric that matters is achieving 99% uptime on those heavy crude oil fields.
And what are the results so far?
Production is projected to rise 20 to 30% in 2026 alone. The operation worked, the system was successfully formatted, the bugs, meaning the regime, were deleted, and now the oil flows seamlessly into the Golden Dome.
Brutal efficiency.
There are no victory parades, there are just pumps working at maximum capacity.
Let's look north now. Case study B, Canada. This one is obviously far less bloody than Venezuela, but geopolitically it might actually be even more significant for the global order. They call it the Northern Backdoor.
This one definitely hits much closer to home for the G7. The diagnosis here was a critical firewall breach.
How does Canada, of all places, become classified as a hemispheric security threat?
The systemic analysis showed that CCP-linked assets buried in Canadian infrastructure, critical minerals mining, and commercial real estate were effectively creating a back door for the Yuan virus right into the heart of North America.
It's like having a highly secure, high-tech fortress with a reinforced steel front door, but just leaving the back kitchen window wide open.
Exactly. And the pathogen was quietly drifting in through that window.
And the administration's reaction was, well, very typical.
Direct and unfiltered. The declaration was simple. China taking over Canada is not going to happen.
But it wasn't just a loud statement. There was a specific heavy mechanism attached to it.
It's a tariff weapon. A blanket 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the U.S. But, and this is the critical part of the OS logic, it came with a very specific condition for removal.
The condition being?
Forced liquidation of specific assets. The U.S. admin provided a hard list. They essentially said, these specific lithium mines, these telecom holding companies, these port authorities, they are owned by entities we have classified as malware. You have exactly 30 days to force a fire sale of these assets to core-aligned buyers, or the tariff stays and your economy burns.
Wow. That is literally antivirus software running at the physical border.
That is exactly what it is. It effectively forced Ottawa to make a binary choice. Are you securely inside the Golden Dome, or are you a liability that we need to isolate?
In Canada, fully realizing its entire economy is inextricably integrated with the U.S. market, had absolutely no choice but to fold.
They patched the breach. They forced the asset sales. But the grand lesson here is that in this new operating system, there is no middle ground allowed. You cannot play the polite, neutral middleman when the hemispheric firewall is being activated. You are either inside the dome or you're outside freezing in the cold.
That brings us to the patient currently lying on the operating table, the one that hasn't folded yet. Segment 4, the critical patient Brazil.
Patient profile, BRSOV01. This is currently the most complex, high-risk surgery on the geopolitical schedule.
The official diagnosis in the papers is systemic schizophrenia, or institutional sepsis.
The root cause of this sepsis is fascinating from an IT perspective. Brazil is currently attempting to run a dual boot system.
Okay, for the non-techies, like a computer trying to run Windows and Linux on the exact same hard drive at the same time.
Exactly. Kernel 1 is the core, the USA. This involves their financial markets, military alliances, tech standards, and general cultural alignment. Kernel 2 is BRICS, driven by China. This involves massive commodities, exports, agricultural dominance, and Chinese-built 6G infrastructure.
And to be fair, for the last decade, Brazil actually managed to do this pretty well. They sold millions of tons of soy and iron to China, and they bought advanced fighter jets from Sweden, or aligned with the U.S. on other issues. They successfully play both sides.
They did. But in 2026, with the Donroe Doctrine fully active, you simply cannot do that anymore. The two operating systems are no longer just different flavors, they are actively, aggressively hostile to each other.
Why specifically, though? Is it just political stubbornness?
No, it is the fundamental hardware. They use deeply incompatible protocols. You physically cannot run Golden Dome security protocols on red bandwidth hardware.
Break that down for me. What does that mean on the ground?
If the Brazilian government allows Huawei to build its foundational 6G backbone, the cellular towers, the deep-sea cables, the servers that literally run the national power grid and the domestic internet, then that entire network becomes inherently transparent to intelligence services in Beijing.
Right.
So the architect sitting in Washington looks at that map and says, I cannot connect my hemispheric military grid to that node. I cannot share sensitive trade or defense intelligence with a country whose nervous system is running on completely compromised hardware.
So it causes a massive system crash.
It causes severe latency, it causes absolute distrust, and the clinical symptoms of the sepsis are appearing rapidly right now. We see institutional osteoporosis, again, massive fiscal debt is actively eroding their domestic institutions. But we also see induced hypoxia.
Asphyxiation.
Yes. The Brazilian economy is literally gasping for air because real foundational growth is being suffocated by the friction. Global investors don't know which rule of law ultimately applies there anymore.
Because they're asking, if I build $1 billion factory in Brazil, will my assets be frozen by U.S. sanctions later? Or will they be subtly seized by Chinese regulatory capture?
Exactly. And that systemic uncertainty is absolute poison to capital. Capital needs clear protocols.
So what is the surgeon's current prognosis for Brazil?
The stress index for Brazil is rapidly entering the red zone. It is currently at 9.2 out of 10. That is critical. That is the violent shaking right before the full systemic seizure.
So what are the actual scenarios here? If you were the leadership in Brazil right now, staring at the bulldozer framework, what are your options?
Scenario A is sink.
Is that the Venezuela option? regime change?
Not necessarily a kinetic regime change, but a surgical amputation of the Chinese node.
Okay.
You officially ban the 6G hardware. You legally cancel the major BRI infrastructure contracts. You align your supply chains fully and exclusively with the Golden Dome.
That sounds incredibly painful for their economy.
Oh, it is absolute agony in the short term. You have to physically rip out infrastructure that is already built and running. You potentially lose your absolute biggest export market in China overnight. It undoubtedly causes a severe domestic recession, but it ensures long-term survival within the dome. It stops the sepsis from killing the host entirely. You take the pain of the amputation to save the body.
And scenario B?
Blue screen. Continued insistence on a dual boot system inevitably leads to kernel panic.
Explain kernel panic in this context.
In computing, a kernel panic is a total system freeze. The computer receives conflicting core commands, it doesn't know what to do, so it completely stops doing anything to protect the hardware.
What does a kernel panic look like for a nation of over 200 million people?
It looks like catastrophic hyperinflation, massive instantaneous capital flight. The framework calls it financial necrosis. The smart money leaves. The highly educated people leave. The economic tissue simply dies. Brazil becomes an isolated, failing, chaotic state in a hemisphere that is otherwise booming inside the dome.
The overriding lesson here seems to be that neutrality is dead. You used to be able to sit comfortably on the fence. Look at Switzerland in the 20th century.
Switzerland is a relic. In the era of the bulldozer, neutrality is interpreted exclusively as latency. And the system's primary function is to aggressively delete latency. You pick a side, or a side is violently picked for you.
Man, it's heavy. It makes the entire world feel like this giant, unfeeling machine that doesn't care about us at all. It doesn't care about culture or history or human nuance. It literally just cares about the code.
That is the entire point of the Logistical OS. The bulldozer is completely ruthless, but it is highly efficient. It safeguards the flow of resources. Yeah. But there is a critical flaw in the logic.
A bug.
A massive bug that the architect has not been able to successfully code out of the system.
Segment 5. The human bug. This is where we finally pivot from the giant machine down to the actual person listening to this right now.
The bulldozer framework officially calls it the ontology error, the ghost in the machine, or simply SBF3, the human bug.
What exactly is the bug?
The Logistical OS operates on the fundamental assumption that humans are essentially just basic drivers, wetware that can be updated with the right incentives. It calculates human behavior purely logically. If we give this population cheaper consumer goods and physical security, they will naturally comply with the new rules.
If we give Venezuela much better, highly efficient oil pumps and a stable currency, the people on the street will be perfectly happy.
Exactly. It expects rational economic compliance. But it completely fails to calculate deeply irrational variables. It cannot compute resentment, it cannot compute honor or deeply held religious beliefs, or the raw human desire for agency. The profound desire to just say no to an authority figure, even if saying no makes you financially poorer.
People are intensely irrational.
People are human, and humans will happily break a mathematically perfect, highly efficient system just to prove to themselves that they are still free. The OS defines this reaction as the kernel panic social.
When the general population slowly realizes that they're just viewed as optimized nodes in a mesmerizingly efficient cold machine, they might actively try to burn the machine down just to feel the warmth of the fire.
We saw subtle hints of this in the Intel notes, sudden, massive protests that make absolutely zero economic sense, but make complete, undeniable emotional sense to the people in the streets.
Exactly. So if this overarching system is fundamentally flawed because it stubbornly ignores basic humanity, but it is simultaneously powerful enough to completely crush any organized dissent, what is the actual solution for the individual? For the listener right now who feels like a tiny, insignificant cog.
The sources suggest a very specific defensive strategy for the individual. You have to learn to distinguish between hardware and software in your own personal life and portfolio.
The mantra is, hardware doesn't lie. Software lies all the time.
That is the core survival mechanic.
Let's apply that to everyday money.
Fiat currency. The dollars or euros in your bank account. That is pure software. It is literally just a database entry on a centralized server. The governing authority can edit it by printing more and causing inflation. They can freeze it via political sanctions, or they can entirely delete it in a currency reset. It relies 100% on their permission.
What about stocks, the traditional 401k?
Mostly software. They are heavily dependent on prevailing narratives, on constantly shifting regulatory laws, and on the ultimate solvency of massive counterparties. They can be wiped out by a single bad policy update.
So what is the actual escape hatch? What is the hardware for a normal person's portfolio?
Hard assets, the physical, unalterable backup. Gold is the prime example.
The classic safe haven.
It works because it is the only major asset that is no one else's liability. If you physically hold the gold, you truly own it. It has zero latency because it requires absolutely no digital network or third-party permission to exist and hold value.
But there is also the digital hard asset, Bitcoin. Now, usually, the traditional financial establishment hates crypto. They call it a scam or a bubble. But the Bulldozer framework has a very specific, surprisingly nuanced, and highly technical take on it.
It views Bitcoin not as magic internet money, but strictly as the fire exit for the global system.
The fire exit. I like that.
Look closely at the Chainalysis data that the Intel sources cited. It explicitly shows Bitcoin network usage massively spiking in what they call the gray zones places, actively dealing with heavy sanctions, severe capital controls, or deep institutional instability.
Places like Russia, Argentina, Turkey.
Exactly. When the blue screen hits a specific country and the local software money dies, the people instantly pivot to using Bitcoin to keep transacting and surviving.
So it works as a true parallel rail, a redundant, unstoppable circuit.
Precisely. And the Bulldozer OS knows this perfectly well. It doesn't ignore it. It actively monitors it using specific diagnostic metrics. It heavily tracks the SSR, the stablecoin supply ratio, and it tracks exchange reserves.
Okay, what is SSR? How does that work as a metric?
Stablecoin supply ratio measures the ratio of the Bitcoin market cap to the total supply of stablecoins like Tether or USDC. Stablecoins represent fiat money waiting on the sidelines of the crypto market.
So it's basically measuring the buying power waiting to jump into Bitcoin.
Exactly. When SSR is low, it means there is a massive amount of digital cash ready to deploy into hard crypto assets. The OS uses these metrics as highly sensitive early warning sensors.
Sensors for what?
When extreme liquidity stress hits the traditional fiat system, when the heart at Hormuz skips a beat, or when a massive sovereign bond auction fails, you see the needle dramatically move on the Bitcoin blockchain first. The capital flees the software and runs to the digital hardware. It is the ultimate canary in the global coal mine.
So the overarching strategy for the listener today is to sink or become junk.
You must proactively align your personal hardware, meaning your wealth and your tangible assets, with the winning operating system. That means heavily holding things that the central system cannot easily delete or inflate away. Physical gold, Bitcoin.
And if you do hold traditional equities, you need to align them with the Golden Dome's priorities.
Yes. Defense contractors, domestic energy producers, heavy industrial manufacturing.
Things that actually exist in the physical world. Things the Bulldozer physically needs to keep running.
Exactly. And you must urgently disconnect from any zombie assets.
Zombie assets being the bonds or currencies of dual-boot nations.
If you are holding Brazilian sovereign debt right now, you are essentially betting that a deeply schizophrenic system will magically heal itself while two superpowers tear it apart. That is a terrible high-risk bet. You need to get out of the blast radius immediately.
We are near the end of the hour here. This has been incredibly intense. Segment 6, voltage alert and final protocol. Let's check the dashboard one last time before we go. It is March 1st, 2026. What are the exact numbers flashing on the screen?
The overall system stress index. The Iran and Hormuz node is holding steady at 7.6 out of 10. That is critical status. One wrong move there, a rogue mine in the water, a misfired missile, and we have an immediate, massive cardiac event in the energy markets.
And what about the global liquidity radiation metric?
It is currently reading greater than 500 millisieverts per hour. That is high risk. The financial system is running extremely hot right now. The toxic radiation is coming directly from the sovereign debt markets. They are highly unstable and deeply over-leveraged.
And the binary SLA is fully active across the globe.
Yes. The world is actively being offered that brutal service-level agreement. Every sovereign nation, every multinational company, and ultimately every individual is implicitly being asked to make the choice. Option 1, sink and purge, submit to the OS audit, clean your house, and get the dome's protection.
Or option 2, blue screen, total disconnection and systemic collapse.
Those are the only options on the table.
So for the listener who has stuck with us through this entire deep dive, what is the final practical prescription? Give it to me in one sentence.
Stop listening to the narrative. Stop watching the daily news that desperately tries to sell you the politics or the emotional drama. That is all just software, and software lies.
Look at the hardware.
Always look at the hardware. Look at the physical flows of oil. Look at the logistical flows of semiconductors and chips. Look at the raw mathematical realities of the debt markets. Hardware doesn't lie.
And your actionable surgical advice.
Amputate your portfolio's exposure to failed partitions. If you have significant investments or business ties in countries that are actively fighting the Bulldozer OS, get out immediately, take the loss if you have to, then reanimate your remaining capital by moving it directly into Golden Dome-protected hard assets.
It sounds so incredibly cold when you phrase it exactly like that. Amputate. Reanimate.
It is not cold. It is clinical survival. In a mass casualty triage situation, emotional empathy is a luxury that you simply cannot afford. You save what can be saved.
Before we completely sign off today, I really want to leave the listener with one final thought to mull over. We have spent an hour talking about this hyper-efficient, utterly terrifying machine, the Bulldozer, the Golden Dome. It is brilliantly designed to be logically perfect, totally efficient, completely frictionless.
But remember the ontology error, the human bug.
Exactly. If the human bug, our stubborn, irrational need for agency, is the one single thing this massive system cannot calculate. If we are actively building a world that is perfectly optimized for data packets but totally inhuman for the people living in it, are we actually building a utopia of efficiency? Or are we just building a highly polished golden cage that we will inevitably violently try to burn down?
That is the defining question of the next decade. The Logistical OS doesn't ask for your opinion on the matter, though. It honestly doesn't care if you like the aesthetics of the cage.
No, it definitely doesn't.
It only asks if you will sink or if you will turn into junk.
Check your personal stress index, everyone. Make sure your hardware is secure. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Stay safe out there.